I was bathing my daughter when my sister called me. I'm so sorry. I had to do what's right for the kids. CPS will be there tomorrow morning. She hung up before I could say anything. The next morning, a CPS investigator knocked on my door with 2 police officers and a court order. We received a report of physical and emotional abuse, the investigator said. We need to examine your children and your home. They searched everything, photographed my whole house, took my 6-year-old Maya and my 9-year-old Devin into separate rooms to interview them. Maya came out crying. Devin looked scared. We found a bruise on Devin's arm, the investigator said. And Maya seems nervous around you. Devin plays soccer. He gets bruised every week. They didn't care. We're removing the children immediately for their safety. They'll go to emergency foster care. No! I tried to grab Maya's hand. Sir, step back or the officers will restrain you. I watched them put my kids in a CPS van. Maya was screaming for me. Devin was crying. The investigator handed me paperwork. Don't contact your children. We'll investigate. If the allegations are true, you could face 20 years. Your hearing is in 5 days. The first thing I did was call my kids' foster placement. I just want to talk to them for 1 minute. Tell them I love them. No contact means no contact. Violation could result in criminal charges. She hung up. I drove to Maya's daycare to get her attendance records. Proof she'd been happy there. The director stopped me at the door. CPS instructed us not to speak with you. Your sister already collected Maya's belongings. She's been granted temporary guardianship. Temporary what? The hearing isn't for 5 days? Emergency placement with family. It's standard. I'm sorry, but you need to leave. I went home and checked my security camera system. 6 months of footage showing normal family dinners, homework help, bedtime stories. I went to download it. The hard drive was gone. The cables were cut. My sister Claire had a key to my house. She'd been here. I called the police. My sister broke in and stole evidence that proves my innocence. The officer sounded bored. Sir, your sister has temporary custody of your children. She's legally allowed to collect their belongings from your residence. If you believe something was stolen, you can file a report, but it'll take weeks to investigate. I don't have weeks, and my hearing is in 5 days. Then I suggest you speak with your lawyer. I called the public defender they'd assigned me. I explained everything. The deleted footage, Claire's lies, her obsession with my kids. Sir, I have 63 cases. CPS found bruises on both children. Multiple witnesses support the abuse claims. Your sister has a clean record, a stable marriage, and passed a home study in 48 hours. That doesn't happen unless she'd already started the process months ago. Exactly. She planned this. Do you have proof of that? I didn't. I'll do my best, but the evidence is overwhelming. I'd prepare yourself for losing custody. I spent the next day calling everyone who knew my family. Maya's pediatrician, Devin's soccer coach, my neighbors, my late wife's family. Every single call went the same way. No one believed me. On day 4, I used my savings to hire a private investigator. I need you to find proof my sister planned this. Search histories, text messages, something. He called me back that afternoon. Sir, I can't take your case. Your sister's lawyer contacted me. Said if I interfere with a CPS investigation, I could lose my license. I'm sorry. The night before the hearing, I sat in my empty house and cried. I tried everything. Calling the kids, getting evidence, talking to witnesses, hiring help. Nothing worked. Claire had thought of everything. The hearing was at 10 a.m. I sat at a table with my public defender. Claire sat across the room with her husband. She looked sad, dabbing her eyes with tissues. Judge Kramer called the hearing to order. The caseworker presented everything. Bruises, ER visits, teacher reports, witness statements from Claire. Then Claire testified. She cried while talking. I love those children like they're my own. I can't watch them suffer anymore. My husband and I have room for them. A stable home, 2 parents. They deserve better. The judge looked at me. Do you have evidence contradicting these allegations? My lawyer stood up. Your Honor, we can explain the bruises. Devin plays competitive soccer. Do you have evidence? The judge repeated. Before my lawyer could answer, the courtroom door opened. My late wife's best friend, Elena, rushed in holding a laptop. Your Honor, I have proof he didn't do this. Judge Kramer frowned. Ma'am, you can't just... Please! I found Claire's laptop at her house and I have her search history. The judge waved her forward. Elena opened the laptop. 4 months ago, Claire searched how to win CPS case and getting custody of niece and nephew and signs of child abuse to report. She has a folder with fake text messages, templates for bruise photos, a timeline for building a case. She turned the screen. And she has videos. Videos she recorded of herself telling Maya and Devin their dad didn't want them anymore. The courtroom went silent. Judge Kramer studied the laptop and looked at Claire. Did you fabricate these allegations to gain custody of your brother's children? Claire's face crumbled. I can't have children, she sobbed. They love me. I'd be a better mother. Judge Kramer's expression hardened as he looked at Claire. The courtroom exploded with shocked murmurs and gasps from the few people in the gallery. 2 bailiffs moved toward Claire's table, while her husband sat completely frozen, his face pale and blank like he couldn't process what was happening. Claire kept sobbing into her hands, her shoulders shaking, but the judge raised his hand for silence. The room went quiet. He looked directly at Claire, and his voice was cold and firm when he spoke. The bailiff stood on either side of her now, waiting for the judge's order. I sat at my table watching this happen, and part of my brain couldn't believe it was real. My sister was about to be arrested. The nightmare that started 5 days ago when CPS took my kids might actually be ending. Judge Kramer ordered the bailiffs to take Claire into custody for investigation of perjury and filing false reports. The bailiffs moved forward, and one of them touched Claire's arm. She looked up at them with red, swollen eyes and didn't resist as they helped her stand. Her husband finally moved, reaching toward her, but a bailiff held up his hand and shook his head. Claire was led toward the side door of the courtroom, still crying, and I watched her go, feeling this weird mix of relief and disbelief and anger all at once. The judge turned to me, and his expression was serious but not cold anymore. He explained that while Claire's confession changed everything, CPS protocol required a full reevaluation before custody could be restored. My heart dropped straight into my stomach. I thought this moment meant I'd get Maya and Devin back right now, today, immediately. But the judge kept talking about procedures and evaluations and proper documentation. He scheduled an emergency follow-up hearing for 3 days from now. 3 more days without my kids. 3 more days of them thinking I abandoned them. I felt my public defender's hand on my arm, but I couldn't look at him. Judge Kramer called a recess, and suddenly people were moving and talking. Elena rushed over to me from where she'd been standing near the judge's bench. I stood up and she threw her arms around me, and I hugged her back so hard my arms shook. She was crying, and I realized I was crying too. She pulled back and grabbed my shoulders and started explaining fast. She went to Claire's house yesterday to drop off some of my late wife's belongings, things that had been in storage. Claire wasn't home, but the door was unlocked. Elena went inside to leave the box and saw the laptop open on the kitchen table. The screen showed a folder labeled Custody Plan. She looked at it and found everything. The search history, the fake text messages, the timeline, the videos of Claire talking to Maya and Devin. She grabbed the laptop and drove straight to the courthouse this morning. The CPS caseworker approached our table slowly, her face showing clear embarrassment. She asked if she could speak with me for a moment. I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to ask her how she could tear my family apart based on lies. How she could take my crying children and put them in a van while Maya screamed for me. But I forced myself to stay calm because Clive had warned me that antagonizing CPS wouldn't help. I took a breath and nodded. She said she needed to interview me again with this new information. She apologized for the initial removal, but explained they have to act on reports of abuse. I just nodded again because I didn't trust myself to speak without yelling. Judge Kramer called us back after 15 minutes. Everyone returned to their seats except Claire, who was gone now. The judge issued a temporary order, allowing supervised visitation starting tomorrow. I was granted 2 hours with my children at a CPS facility. 2 hours. With my own kids. After 5 days of being completely cut off from them. It felt like a gift and an insult at the same time. These were my children, and I did nothing wrong, but I had to see them in some sterile room with a social worker watching us like I might hurt them. But it was better than nothing. It was better than the silence and separation of the past 5 days. My public defender leaned close after the judge finished and spoke quietly. He suggested I hire a private attorney now that the case had taken this dramatic turn. He explained that getting custody fully restored and pursuing charges against Claire required expertise he didn't have time to provide. He had 63 other cases. He pulled out a business card and wrote 3 names on the back. Family law attorneys who handle complex custody cases. He handed it to me and wished me luck. I left the courthouse holding that card and feeling determined to call all 3 names today. I walked to my car in the parking lot and sat behind the wheel for a minute, just breathing. Then I looked at the first name on the list and put the address into my phone. The office was downtown, 20 minutes away. I drove straight there without calling first. The receptionist looked surprised when I walked in and asked to see Clive Dougherty without an appointment. I explained my situation in quick sentences. CPS took my kids 5 days ago. My sister fabricated abuse allegations. Her laptop proved she planned everything. I just came from court where she confessed. I need help getting my children back. The receptionist picked up her phone and spoke quietly. 2 minutes later, a man in his 50s with gray hair and a sharp suit came out. He introduced himself as Clive and brought me back to his office. I sat across from his desk and he listened while I explained everything again in more detail. He asked to see Elena's laptop evidence and the judge's orders from this morning. I pulled out the paperwork and he read through it carefully. Then he looked up and told me he'd take my case. We needed to move fast and document everything while memories were fresh. He pulled out a legal pad and started taking notes. Clive explained that even with Claire's confession, I'd need to rebuild my case from scratch with positive evidence of my parenting. Proof of her lies wasn't enough by itself. I needed to show I was a good father, not just prove she was a liar. We spent 2 hours going through everything. My documentation of normal family life, photos on my phone of Devin's soccer games and Maya's daycare activities, report cards, medical records showing regular checkups. He made a list of witnesses we needed to interview: Devin's coach, Maya's daycare director, neighbors who'd seen me with the kids, anyone who could provide statements about my parenting. By the time I left his office, it was almost 5 o'clock, and I felt exhausted, but also more hopeful than I had in days. The next morning, I arrived at the CPS Visitation Center 30 minutes early. My hands were sweating, and my heart was racing at the thought of seeing Maya and Devin after 5 days that felt like years. I sat in the waiting room watching the clock. Finally, a social worker came out and led me down a hallway to a small room with toys and a table and chairs. She told me to wait. 5 minutes later, the door opened and they brought my children in. Maya saw me and ran forward crying. I dropped to my knees and caught her and she crashed into me sobbing. Devin stood in the doorway looking uncertain. His face was guarded and his eyes were red like he'd been crying recently. I held Maya against my shoulder with one arm and reached out my other hand toward Devin. He looked at my hand and then at my face and slowly walked closer. I pulled him into the hug too and held both my children and tried not to cry myself. The social worker sat in a chair in the corner watching us. Maya was sobbing into my shoulder saying "Daddy" over and over. Devin stood stiff in my arms at first, but gradually relaxed a little. I told them I loved them and I missed them so much. Maya pulled back and looked at my face with tears running down her cheeks. She asked why Aunt Claire took them away. I didn't know how to answer that in a way a 6-year-old would understand. Devin pulled away from me completely and took a step back. He looked at me with this expression that was angry and hurt and confused all at once. Then he asked me why I let them take him away. His question hit me like someone punched me in the stomach. He was 9 years old, and he didn't understand that I had no choice, no power to stop what happened. He thought I just let CPS take them. He thought I didn't fight for them. I dropped down to sit on the floor with both of them and pulled them close. The social worker in the corner shifted in her chair but didn't say anything. I looked at Devin's face and saw all the hurt and confusion there, and I tried to figure out how to explain something I barely understood myself. I told him that I fought as hard as I could, that I called lawyers and tried to get evidence and did everything possible, but the judge believed Aunt Claire's lies and I had no power to stop what happened. Maya was still pressed against my side, and she pulled back to look at me with tears on her cheeks. She asked why Claire would lie about me hurting them. I didn't have a good answer for a 6-year-old. How do you explain to a child that a trusted adult fabricated an entire case to steal them away? I settled for telling her that sometimes grown-ups make very bad choices when they're sad, that Aunt Claire wanted kids of her own, so badly that she did something terrible to try to take them from me. Devin was quiet for a minute. Then he told me something that made my stomach drop. He said that during the 5 days at Claire's house, she kept telling him and Maya that I didn't really want them anymore. She said they'd be happier living with her forever, that she could give them things I couldn't, that I was probably relieved to have them gone. I felt sick listening to this. Maya nodded and said Claire told her the same thing, that Daddy was tired of taking care of them alone. The extent of the psychological damage Claire inflicted in just 5 days hit me then. She hadn't just lied to CPS and the court. She'd actively worked to destroy my children's trust in me, to make them believe I'd abandoned them willingly. I understood in that moment that even after I got custody back, we'd be dealing with this trauma for months or years. We sat together on that floor, and I held them and tried to reassure them that none of what Claire said was true. I told them I'd been trying to see them every single day, that I'd hired lawyers and fought in court and done everything I could to bring them home. Devin asked if I was telling the truth, and hearing that question from my own son broke something inside me. But I kept my voice steady and told him yes, absolutely, that I would never stop fighting for them. Maya asked when they could come home, and I had to tell her I didn't know yet, but I was working on it. The 2 hours passed too quickly. We played with some of the toys in the room, and I asked them about what they'd been doing, trying to keep things as normal as possible. But the whole time I was aware of the social worker watching us and the clock on the wall ticking down. When she finally stood up and said visitation was over, Maya's face crumpled. She grabbed onto my shirt and started screaming that she didn't want to go. I tried to calm her down, but she was hysterical, crying and clinging to me while the social worker approached. Devin's whole body went rigid, and his face went blank, like he was shutting down emotionally to protect himself. The social worker told me I needed to let Maya go, and I tried to peel her fingers off my shirt while she screamed. Another worker came in to help, and they physically removed her from me while she sobbed. Devin just stood there frozen, not looking at me. I watched them lead my children out of that room, and I couldn't do anything to comfort Maya, or reach Devin, and the social worker told me the time limit was firm, regardless of the children's distress. I sat in that empty room for a few minutes after they left, trying to pull myself together. Then I drove straight to Clive's office. His receptionist saw my face and brought me back immediately. I told him everything about the visitation, about Devin's question and Claire's manipulation, and Maya's terror at being separated again. Clive took notes and told me this was actually helpful for our case, because it demonstrated the psychological harm Claire caused. He said he'd already filed a motion for increased visitation and an emergency psychological evaluation of the children by an independent expert. He explained that documenting Claire's manipulation would strengthen our case and possibly speed up the custody restoration process. I left his office feeling slightly better, like at least someone was taking action. That afternoon, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, the man introduced himself as Quentin Walden from CPS. His tone was completely different from the original caseworker, more respectful and professional. He said he was personally reviewing the entire case file in light of the new evidence, and he needed to schedule a reevaluation interview with me for tomorrow morning. I agreed immediately. He mentioned that he'd already reviewed Elena's laptop evidence and spoken with Judge Kramer's office, and I could hear in his voice that he actually believed me now. That gave me a small amount of hope that someone in the system was finally paying attention. Elena showed up at my house that evening with takeout food. She made me sit down and eat while she cleaned up my kitchen, which I'd been neglecting. After dinner, I broke down crying and told her about Devin, asking why I let them take him away, and Maya's terror when visitation ended. Elena sat next to me and let me cry, then reminded me that my late wife had trusted me completely as a father. She said that once the truth was fully documented, the kids would understand what really happened. But right now, I needed to focus on being strong for them and getting through the evaluation process. She stayed until late, and having someone there who believed in me made the empty house feel less suffocating. The next morning, I arrived at the CPS office 30 minutes early for my re-evaluation interview. Quentin met me in the lobby and brought me back to a conference room. He had a thick file on the table and a recording device. He asked me to walk through a typical day with Maya and Devin before the removal. I described everything. How I'd wake up at 6 and get them ready for school. Making breakfast while Devin packed his soccer gear and Maya looked for her favorite stuffed animal. Dropping Devin at elementary school and then Maya at daycare. My work schedule and how I'd pick them up in the afternoon. Devin's soccer practices 3 times a week where I'd watch from the sidelines. Helping with homework at the kitchen table, making dinner while they played, bath time and bedtime stories. All the mundane details of single parenting that suddenly felt precious now that they'd been taken away. Quentin listened and took notes, and I could tell he was actually hearing me this time instead of just looking for signs of abuse. Then he pulled out photos of Devin's bruise and asked me to explain it. I grabbed my phone and showed him dozens of pictures from soccer games. Devin with grass stains on his knees, Devin with a scrape on his elbow, Devin with various bruises from getting knocked around during plays. I explained that he played midfielder, which meant he was constantly in the thick of the action getting bumped and shoved. His coach could verify that the specific bruise CPS photographed happened during a particularly rough game 3 days before they showed up at my door. Quentin nodded and made more notes. We discussed Maya's nervousness during the original interview. I explained that she'd always been shy around strangers, that being suddenly separated from me and questioned by unfamiliar adults in an unfamiliar place would obviously make any 6-year-old anxious. It wasn't evidence of abuse, it was evidence of normal childhood stranger anxiety combined with the trauma of being removed from her father. Quentin seemed to understand this. He told me he was recommending increased visitation to 4 hours daily while the full evaluation continued. He said the initial removal had been based on Claire's false statements and circumstantial evidence that looked worse than it was, and now that the truth was emerging, he wanted to start rebuilding the parent-child bond immediately. That felt like a small victory. When I got home that afternoon, Clive called. Judge Kramer had approved the increased visitation starting tomorrow. Even better, the judge had ordered an independent psychological evaluation of all 3 of us by Martha Pike, a therapist who specialized in parental alienation cases. Clive explained that the evaluation would take 2 weeks and involve multiple sessions with me and separate sessions with each kid. Martha's report would be crucial for the final custody hearing. He told me I needed to be completely honest with her about everything, including the hard parts of single parenting and the times I'd struggled, because trying to present myself as perfect would hurt my credibility more than admitting normal parenting challenges. The next morning, I drove to the CPS facility for my second visitation with Maya and Devin. My hands shook less than last time because I knew what to expect now. The social worker brought them in, and Maya ran to me immediately, but her crying was quieter, more controlled. Devin walked over slowly and sat next to me on the floor instead of hanging back near the door. I hugged Maya and reached out to touch Devin's shoulder, and he didn't pull away. We sat together and Devin started asking questions about what was happening with the case. He wanted to know when he could come home and if the judge believed us now. I explained that everyone knew Aunt Claire lied, and we were working to fix everything, which seemed to help him relax a little. Maya kept her arms wrapped around my waist the whole time, but she wasn't screaming or shaking like before. Devin asked if we could play a game, and I pulled out the cards I'd brought. We played Go Fish, and Devin actually smiled when he won, and that small smile felt like the biggest victory I'd had in weeks. The social worker took notes from her corner, but mostly stayed quiet. When visitation ended, Devin hugged me goodbye without me asking first, and Maya only cried for a minute before the social worker led them away. I sat in my car afterward and called Clive to tell him about the progress. He said Devin asking questions was a good sign that he was processing, instead of shutting down completely. During the next visitation 2 days later, Devin brought up Claire directly. He asked me why she told lies about us, and I carefully explained that the judge made a mistake because Aunt Claire told stories that weren't true, but now everyone knew the real facts and we were working to fix it. Devin's face got serious and he asked if Claire was going to jail. I told him honestly that I didn't know yet, which led to a complicated conversation about how sometimes people who do bad things are sick inside their heads and need help from doctors, not just punishment. Devin thought about this for a while, and then asked if being sick made it okay that Claire lied. I explained that being sick doesn't make it okay, but it helps us understand why she did something so terrible. Maya listened to our conversation but didn't say much, just stayed close to me and played with the blocks I'd brought. Devin asked if we were sick too, and I promised him that we were healthy and strong, and that what happened to us wasn't our fault. He seemed satisfied with that answer, and we moved on to talking about his soccer team and the games he'd missed. The social worker watching us made more notes, and I wondered what she was writing down. whether she saw the same progress I did, or if she was documenting problems I couldn't see. My first session with Martha Pike happened the next afternoon at her office across town. She had a calm voice and kind eyes that reminded me a little of my late wife, which made it easier to talk. Martha asked detailed questions about my relationship with each child, how we spent our days, what our routines looked like, how I handled discipline and homework and bedtime. She asked about my late wife's death 3 years ago and how we'd coped as a family since then. I told her the truth about the hard days when I felt overwhelmed trying to be both parents, the times I'd lost my patience with Devon's attitude or Maya's tantrums, the moments I'd cried in my bedroom after the kids went to sleep because I missed my wife so much. Martha wrote notes, but her face stayed neutral and supportive. I explained that I wasn't a perfect parent, that I'd made mistakes and had bad days, but I loved my children and always put their needs first. Martha nodded and said that honest self-awareness was more valuable than pretending to be flawless. She asked how I managed work and parenting alone, and I described my schedule, the support from neighbors and friends, the way my late wife's family helped with childcare when I needed it. Martha asked what scared me most about this situation, and I told her that losing my kids permanently would destroy me, that they were the only family I had left. She made more notes and told me we'd meet again in 3 days. At my second session with Martha, she shifted focus to Claire. She asked about my sister's relationship with the kids before this incident happened. I explained that Claire had always been involved and loving, that she babysat frequently and attended Devon's soccer games and took Maya to the park. I told Martha that Claire seemed like a devoted aunt who genuinely cared about the kids, which made her betrayal even more shocking. Martha asked if I'd noticed any warning signs of instability or obsession, and I admitted that I hadn't seen anything concerning. Claire had seemed normal, helpful, supportive. I told Martha that I felt guilty now for missing whatever signs must have been there, for not protecting my children from someone I should have recognized as dangerous. Martha said that manipulative people are often skilled at hiding their true intentions until they strike, that it wasn't my fault for trusting my sister. She asked how Claire had reacted to my wife's death, and I remembered that Claire had been devastated, that she'd helped plan the funeral and stayed with us for a week afterward. Martha made notes about this and asked more questions about Claire's marriage and her struggles with infertility. I told her what I knew, which wasn't much because Claire had always been private about that topic. Martha said she was building a complete picture of the family dynamics to understand how this situation developed. The following week, Martha scheduled separate sessions with Maya and Devon. The social worker brought them to Martha's office while I waited in the lobby, not allowed to sit in on their conversations. I paced the waiting room for an hour while Martha talked to Devon, then another hour while she met with Maya. When they came out, both kids looked tired but okay. Devon told me Martha was nice and that they'd played games while they talked. Maya said she drew pictures for Martha. I wanted to ask what they'd discussed, but I knew the sessions were private. Clive had explained that confidentiality was standard and that Martha's professional opinion would be based on evidence, not emotion. Still, waiting for her report felt like torture when my children's future depended on what she concluded. I drove the kids back to their foster placement and hugged them goodbye, then went home to my empty house and tried not to think about all the ways this could still go wrong. Clive called that evening to check in, and I told him about the sessions. He reminded me that Martha was an expert in parental alienation cases and that her evaluation would carry significant weight with the judge. A week after the courtroom revelation, a police detective called my cell phone. He said they were investigating Claire's break-in and theft of my security footage and wanted to know if I wanted to press charges. I told him I needed to talk to my lawyer first and called Clive immediately. Clive said filing the report would establish a pattern of criminal behavior and premeditation, which would strengthen the case for keeping Claire away from my kids permanently. I felt conflicted because Claire was still my sister, despite what she'd done, and part of me didn't want to pile more criminal charges on top of everything else. But Clive reminded me that Claire had planned this for months, that she'd deliberately destroyed evidence that could have prevented my children from being taken. I called the detective back and told him I wanted to press charges. He said they'd need me to come to the station to give a formal statement and provide documentation of what was stolen. I spent the next afternoon at the police station going through everything, describing the security system and the missing hard drive and the cut cables. The detective took photos and filled out forms and told me the case would be forwarded to the district attorney's office for prosecution. The next day, I drove to Maya's former daycare to talk to Rita Campos. I found her in the main classroom helping a group of kids with an art project. When she saw me, she smiled and came over immediately. I asked if she'd be willing to provide a written statement about my parenting for the custody hearing. Rita said yes without hesitation and told me she'd been horrified when CPS showed up to collect Maya's things. She said that in 2 years of daily drop-offs and pickups, she'd never once seen anything concerning about my interactions with my daughter. Rita described how Maya always ran to me excited at pickup time, how I was patient and kind even when Maya was tired and cranky, how I'd volunteered for field trips and holiday parties. She said Maya talked about me constantly at daycare, always saying her dad was the best. Rita gave me her email address and said she'd send the statement to Clive by the end of the week. I thanked her and felt a small weight lift off my shoulders, knowing I had at least one person who could vouch for me as a parent. From the daycare, I drove straight to the soccer fields where Hudson Travis was running practice with Devon's team. I waited until practice ended and then approached Hudson near the equipment shed. He recognized me immediately and asked how Devin was doing. I explained the situation briefly and asked if he'd provide a statement about Devin's bruising and our relationship. Hudson said absolutely and told me he'd been shocked when he heard about the CPS investigation. He said Devin was enthusiastic about soccer and got knocked around constantly during games and practices, that bruises were completely normal for a midfielder who played as aggressively as Devin did. Hudson mentioned that I'd attended every single practice and game, that I'd helped coach occasionally when they needed extra adults, that Devin talked constantly about his dad, and their bond was obvious to everyone on the team. He said he'd write up a detailed statement and send it to Clive within 2 days. Hudson asked when Devin would be able to rejoin the team, and I told him hopefully soon that we were working on getting custody restored. He said the team missed Devin and that several parents had asked about him. That evening, my neighbors knocked on my door. The elderly couple who lived next door came in and sat at my kitchen table. They told me they'd been questioned by CPS during the initial investigation and that they'd given positive statements about me. They said they'd told the caseworker they'd never heard yelling or seen anything inappropriate in the 3 years we'd been neighbors. They were angry that their statements had apparently been ignored in favor of Claire's lies. The wife said she'd watched me parent Maya and Devin through her kitchen window and had always thought I was doing a wonderful job as a single father. The husband said they'd be happy to testify at any hearing if needed, that they wanted to help however they could. I thanked them and felt grateful to have neighbors who actually paid attention and cared enough to get involved. They stayed for coffee and we talked about the case and the kids and how much I missed having them home. When they left, the wife hugged me and told me to stay strong, that the truth would win in the end. My 4th visitation with the kids happened 3 days later. When the social worker brought them in, Devin walked straight to me and hugged me first without hanging back. I felt my throat get tight because this was the first time he'd initiated contact since everything started. Maya hugged me too, and we all sat on the floor together. I'd brought board games and we played for the full 2 hours. Devin talked about soccer and asked when he could go back to practice. I told him hopefully very soon that his coach missed him and the team wanted him back. Maya told me about the foster home and the other kids there, how she had her own bed and a nightlight because she was scared of the dark. We played Candyland and Sorry and Devin won both games. For brief moments it almost felt normal, like we were just having a regular afternoon together instead of supervised visitation in a CPS facility. Devin asked if we could have pizza for dinner when he came home, and I promised we'd order his favorite toppings. Maya said she wanted to sleep in her own bed again because the foster home bed was too hard. The social worker announced that time was up and reality crashed back in. Devin hugged me goodbye and told me he loved me, and I had to fight to keep from crying in front of him. Maya clung to me, and the social worker had to gently pull her away. I watched them leave and sat alone in the visitation room for a few minutes, trying to pull myself together before driving home. 2 weeks later, Martha finished her evaluation and sent her report to the court. My phone rang that afternoon and I saw Clive's name on the screen. I answered before the second ring. He told me the report was strongly in my favor, that Martha concluded I was a capable and loving parent, that the children had been doing great before they got taken away, and that Claire had deliberately turned them against me during the time she had custody. I sat down on my couch because my legs felt weak. Clive kept talking, reading parts of the report out loud, and every sentence felt like proof that I wasn't crazy, that I hadn't imagined being a good father. The report said Devin's anger toward me came directly from Claire's lies, not from any real problems in our relationship before. Martha wrote that both kids showed clear signs of being manipulated and that they needed therapy to deal with the trauma of being separated from me. She recommended putting us back together immediately with therapy support for all 3 of us. Clive said this report basically guaranteed I'd get custody back at the final hearing. I thanked him about 5 times and then sat alone in my living room staring at nothing, trying to believe this nightmare might actually end soon. I called my neighbor and told her the news, and she started crying on the phone, saying she'd been praying for this outcome. I wanted to tell Maya and Devin, but I couldn't contact them, so I just sat with the knowledge that someone official had finally seen the truth. 2 days before the final hearing, Clive called again. The district attorney's office had contacted him about pressing criminal charges against Claire. They were thinking about prosecuting her for filing false reports, lying under oath, and hurting children through psychological abuse. They wanted to know how hard I wanted them to go after her. Clive said I needed to meet with the prosecutor to discuss it, so we set up an appointment for the next morning. I spent that evening thinking about Claire sitting in a jail cell and feeling sick about it, even after everything she'd done. She was still my sister. Part of me remembered her before all this, back when she was just my sister who loved my kids and brought them presents and cheered at Devin's soccer games. But another part of me remembered Maya screaming in that CPS van and Devin asking why I let them take him away. The prosecutor's office was in a building downtown with metal detectors at the entrance. I met with a woman who had Claire's file spread across her desk. She asked me what I wanted to see happen to my sister. I tried to explain how I felt, but the words came out messy and confused. I said Claire was clearly sick in her head, that she needed mental health help more than jail time, but I was also so angry about what she'd put my children through that part of me wanted her punished as much as possible. The prosecutor listened and took notes. I told her about Claire not being able to have kids of her own and how desperate that had made her, and how she'd loved Maya and Devin since they were babies. I said I didn't know if that made what she did better or worse. The prosecutor asked if I'd be willing to testify if the case went to trial, and I said yes, because my kids deserve to have someone stand up for them officially, even if it meant testifying against my own sister. Clive explained afterward that my feelings didn't actually control whether the state prosecuted Claire or not. In criminal cases, the state is the one suing, not me, so the DA could move forward even if I didn't want them to. But my cooperation and testimony would be really important if things went to trial. The prosecutor told us they were thinking about offering Claire a plea deal instead of going to trial. The deal would include required mental health treatment and probation instead of serious prison time because of her mental health problems. Clive said this made sense given the circumstances and would spare the kids from having to testify in court. I agreed that keeping Maya and Devin out of a courtroom seemed like the right choice, even though part of me still wanted Claire to face a jury for what she'd done. The night before the final custody hearing, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that could go wrong. What if the judge found some technical problem with Martha's evaluation? What if Claire's lawyer had some trick we hadn't thought of? What if CPS changed their recommendation at the last minute? I knew rationally that the evidence was completely in my favor now, that Martha's report and all the witness statements made my case solid, but I couldn't stop my brain from inventing disasters. I got up around 3 in the morning and made coffee and sat at my kitchen table going through all the paperwork Clive had prepared. I read Martha's report again, focusing on the parts about how well the kids had been doing before Claire destroyed everything. I looked at the statements from Rita and Hudson and my neighbors, all saying I was a good father who loved his children, but I still felt terrified that somehow, some way, the system would fail me again, like it had failed me when they believed Claire's lies in the first place. The final hearing started at 10 in the morning. I sat next to Clive at the same table where I'd sat during that first terrible hearing. Judge Kramer came in, and everyone stood up, and then we sat back down, and he started reviewing the evidence. He had Martha's evaluation in front of him, and he read through parts of it out loud. He talked about the witness statements from Rita and Hudson and my neighbors, and he mentioned Quentin's updated CPS report that recommended giving me custody back. The judge looked at me directly and asked if I was prepared to support the children through therapy to deal with the trauma they'd been through. I told him absolutely. Whatever they needed, I would do anything to help them heal from this. My voice shook a little when I said it, but I meant every word. Clive had prepared me for this question, and I'd practiced my answer. But actually saying it to the judge while my kid's future hung in the balance made it feel completely different from practicing in Clive's office. Judge Kramer reviewed more paperwork and asked a few more questions, and then he made his ruling. He said full custody was restored to me immediately, starting today. I felt my whole body go weak with relief. The judge kept talking, saying all 3 of us had to do family therapy for at least 6 months, which I would have agreed to anyway. Then he issued a restraining order preventing Claire from contacting me or the children, and he referred her case to the district attorney's office for criminal prosecution. He said her actions were too serious to just ignore, that she'd caused real harm that needed real consequences. I barely heard the last part because I was trying not to cry in the courtroom. Clive put his hand on my shoulder and I realized the hearing was over, that I'd actually won, that I was getting my kids back. After the judge left, Clive told me I could pick up Maya and Devin from their foster placement that afternoon. The relief hit me so hard I actually felt dizzy and had to sit down for a minute. Everything I'd been carrying for weeks suddenly felt lighter, like I could finally breathe properly again. Clive shook my hand and told me the hard work of healing was just beginning, that getting custody back was just the first step. He reminded me that the kids had been through trauma and that rebuilding our family would take time and patience and probably a lot of therapy sessions, but at least we'd be together as a family while we did it, and that was what mattered most. I thanked him for everything he'd done, for believing me when almost nobody else did, for fighting to bring my children home. I drove to the foster home that afternoon with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. The address was in a neighborhood about 20 minutes from my house. I parked in front of a regular-looking house with toys in the yard and knocked on the door. A woman answered and I told her who I was and she smiled and invited me inside. She called for Maya and Devin, and I heard their footsteps running down the hallway. Maya saw me first and her face lit up, and she started crying happy tears while running toward me. I dropped to my knees and caught her in a hug, holding her tight while she sobbed into my shoulder. Devin came out more slowly, looking cautious but hopeful, like he was afraid to believe this was real. I reached out one arm to him and he came closer and let me pull him into the hug too. The foster parents stood back and gave us space, and the woman told me the kids had talked about me constantly, asking every day when they could come home. She said they'd been good kids to care for, but that they clearly missed me terribly. Her words helped ease some of my worry about permanent damage from our separation, made me think maybe we could actually recover from this nightmare Claire had put us through. I collected their backpacks and stuffed animals from the foster parents and thanked them for taking care of Maya and Devin. We walked to my car in the driveway, and I buckled them into their seats, my hands shaking slightly as I clicked the seatbelts into place. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment before starting the engine and turned around to look at them. I told them we were going home and staying together, that nobody could separate us again. Devin's face looked worried, and he asked if Aunt Claire could take them away again. I promised him there was a court order preventing her from coming anywhere near us, that the judge made it official, and she couldn't break that rule. He nodded slowly, and I saw his shoulders relax just a little bit, though his eyes still looked uncertain. Maya reached forward and grabbed my hand through the gap between the seats and squeezed it tight. I drove home slowly, checking the rearview mirror constantly to look at their faces and make sure they were really there with me. The house felt different when we walked inside, like we were all strangers trying to remember how to live together. Maya wouldn't let go of my hand and followed me from the living room to the kitchen when I went to get them snacks. Devin sat on the couch and watched me carefully, his body tense like he was waiting for something bad to happen. I tried to act normal and asked them if they wanted to watch TV or play a game, but everything felt forced and awkward. That first night was harder than I expected because the trauma had changed all our normal patterns. Maya refused to go to her own room and cried when I suggested it, so I set up blankets on my bedroom floor for both kids. Devin didn't argue about the arrangement, but he stayed quiet and kept looking at the door like he was checking escape routes. I made their favorite dinner that evening, chicken nuggets and mac and cheese with carrot sticks on the side. We sat together at our kitchen table for the first time in almost 3 weeks, and I felt a weird mix of relief and sadness. The conversation was stilted at first with long silences between comments about nothing important. Maya picked at her food and asked if we could eat here every night now, and I promised her we would. Devin eventually started talking about his soccer team and asking if he could go back to practice, which felt like progress. They gradually started talking about normal kid things like school and friends, and I felt like maybe we could find our way back to who we were before Claire destroyed our sense of safety. After dinner, we played a board game in the living room, and I let them win without making it obvious. That night, Maya had a nightmare and woke up screaming for me around 2 a.m. I rushed to my bedroom floor where she was sleeping and held her while she cried into my shoulder. She told me she dreamed Aunt Claire came to take her away again and that I couldn't stop it from happening. I rocked her back and forth and told her it was just a dream, that we were safe now and together. But I realized that even though we were physically together in the same house, the psychological damage would take much longer to heal than I initially hoped. Devin woke up too and sat up on his blanket watching us with scared eyes. Our first family therapy session with Martha happened 3 days after we got back together. I drove the kids to her office in a building downtown, and we sat in a waiting room with cheerful posters on the walls. Martha came out to get us, and she had a warm smile that immediately put the kids at ease. She worked with us on rebuilding trust and processing the trauma, asking questions about how we felt and what scared us most. She gave me specific strategies for helping the kids feel secure again, including maintaining extremely consistent routines and being patient with regression behaviors. She explained that Maya's clinginess and Devin's watchfulness were normal responses to what happened. Over the next week, Devin started having angry outbursts over minor frustrations that never bothered him before. He threw his soccer ball across the yard when he missed a goal and yelled at Maya for touching his homework. I called Martha, and she explained this was a normal response to the powerlessness he felt during the separation. She taught me techniques for helping him express his anger safely and reminded me that his emotions weren't really about the immediate trigger. She said his anger was about the bigger betrayal he experienced when adults he trusted let him down. I practiced staying calm when he exploded and giving him space to feel his feelings without judgment. Maya developed separation anxiety and had trouble going to daycare for the first time in her life. She cried and clung to me at drop-off, begging me not to leave her there. Rita was understanding and worked with me to create a gradual transition plan where I stayed for the first 15 minutes each morning. But it broke my heart to see my previously confident daughter so fearful about being away from me. 2 weeks after we got back together, Devin exploded at me during homework time over a math problem he couldn't solve. He threw his pencil across the kitchen table and yelled that I was a bad dad because I let them get taken away. His words cut deep and I felt my chest tighten with guilt and pain. But Martha had prepared me for this exact moment during our sessions, so instead of getting defensive, I took a deep breath. I acknowledged his anger and told him he was allowed to be mad about what happened to us, that his feelings were valid. We sat down together on the couch and had a long conversation where I explained again that the judge made a decision based on lies. I told him I fought every single day to get them back, that I never stopped trying. Devin cried and admitted he knew it wasn't really my fault, but he was angry anyway because someone should have protected them from what happened. I told him that feeling made complete sense, and that I was angry too about the whole situation. We sat together for a while, and he eventually leaned against my shoulder. Later that week, Clive called me with news about Claire's case. The district attorney's office was offering her a plea deal instead of going to trial. She would plead guilty to filing false reports and child endangerment in exchange for 5 years probation and mandatory psychiatric treatment. The deal included permanent supervised visitation only if I ever chose to allow contact with the kids. Clive said Claire's lawyer indicated she would accept the deal, which meant no trial and no forcing the kids to testify about what happened. I felt relieved we wouldn't have to go through a long court process that would keep the trauma fresh. I sat in Clive's office the next day and told him I wasn't sure how to feel about the plea deal. Part of me wanted Claire to face serious prison time for what she put us through. Clive leaned back in his chair and explained that a full trial would take months, maybe even a year, and Devin and Maya would probably have to testify about the videos Claire made and the things she told them. He said watching their kids testify in court destroys some families even when they win the case. The mandatory psychiatric treatment would address why Claire did this in the first place, and the permanent supervision meant she could never be alone with my children again, without my explicit permission and a court order. I understood his logic, but it still felt like she was getting off easy for destroying our lives. Clive reminded me that 5 years of probation meant any violation would send her straight to prison, and the felony conviction would follow her forever. I signed the paperwork agreeing not to oppose the plea deal. The sentencing hearing happened a month later. I went alone because I didn't want Devin and Maya anywhere near that courthouse. Claire sat at the defense table looking smaller than I remembered, her face pale and her hands shaking. When the judge asked if she wanted to make a statement, she stood up and her voice cracked as she apologized to the court. She said she knew what she did was unforgivable, and that she destroyed her relationship with her brother and hurt 2 innocent children. Her lawyer presented a thick folder of medical records showing years of fertility treatments, multiple miscarriages, and severe depression that worsened after each failed attempt to have a baby. The psychiatrist's evaluation described how Claire's mental state deteriorated until she fixated on Devin and Maya as the children she couldn't have naturally. None of it excused what she did, but it explained the why behind her actions. I sat in the gallery and felt a confusing mix of anger and pity watching my sister fall apart at the podium. The judge reviewed all the documents and then looked directly at Claire. He told her that her actions were cruel and calculated, that she'd traumatized 2 young children who trusted her, and that she was fortunate their father was showing mercy by not demanding maximum prosecution. He accepted the plea deal and sentenced her to 5 years probation with mandatory psychiatric treatment starting immediately. The judge ordered absolutely no contact with me or the children unless I specifically requested it through proper legal channels, and he made it clear that any violation would result in immediate incarceration. Claire nodded and wiped tears from her face as the bailiff led her out of the courtroom. I thought I'd feel satisfied seeing her sentenced, but instead I just felt empty and tired. I walked out of the courtroom and headed toward the exit when Claire's husband caught up with me in the hallway. He looked exhausted and older than the last time I'd seen him. He apologized for not stopping her and said he didn't know the full extent of what she was planning until Elena brought that laptop to court. He told me they were separating because he couldn't trust her anymore after learning she'd been plotting for months to take my children. His voice shook when he said he kept asking himself how he missed the signs that his wife was having a complete breakdown. I didn't know what to say to him because part of me blamed him for not seeing what Claire was becoming, but another part of me understood that manipulative people hide their true intentions really well. We stood there awkwardly for a minute before he walked away, and I realized our entire extended family had been destroyed by Claire's actions. Over the next month, Maya's separation anxiety started getting better. The first few weeks after reunification, she screamed and clung to me every morning at daycare drop-off. Rita was patient and helped me create a routine where I stayed for 15 minutes each morning until Maya felt comfortable. Gradually, the crying sessions got shorter, and Maya started letting me leave without a total meltdown. Rita called me one afternoon about 6 weeks after we got back together and told me Maya was playing with the other kids during free time instead of sitting alone watching the door for me to come back. She said it was a significant step forward in Maya's healing process. When I picked Maya up that day, she ran over excitedly to show me a painting she'd made, and for the first time since CPS took her, she seemed like her old self. Devin's progress happened differently. He had a major breakthrough during a therapy session with Martha when he finally admitted what was really scaring him. Martha called me after the session and explained that Devin told her he was afraid that if he loved me too much again, something bad would happen and he'd lose me like he lost his mom. He'd been pushing me away and staying emotionally distant as a way to protect himself from future pain. Martha helped him understand that protecting his heart by building walls would only make him feel more alone, and that taking the risk of trusting again was how families heal together. She said Devin cried during their conversation, but seemed relieved to finally say out loud what had been eating at him for months. That night at dinner, Devin actually initiated a conversation with me about his soccer team instead of giving one-word answers to my questions, and I knew something had shifted between us. 3 months after reunification, we settled into new routines that felt stable and safe. Friday nights became movie nights where we made popcorn and let the kids pick whatever they wanted to watch. Saturday mornings, Devin had soccer games, and Maya and I sat in the bleachers cheering for him, and afterward we'd get ice cream regardless of whether his team won or lost. Sunday afternoons, we drove to the park where we'd scattered my late wife's ashes 3 years ago. We'd sit on the bench near the big oak tree and talk to her about our week, telling her about Devin's goals and Maya's artwork and how we were slowly becoming okay again. The kids seemed to find comfort in those Sunday visits, like their mom was still part of our family even though she wasn't physically here anymore. One afternoon, I got a letter from Claire's attorney. Inside was a short note asking if Claire could send birthday cards to Devin and Maya. The letter emphasized that Claire wasn't requesting any direct contact or visits, just permission to mail cards on their birthdays. I called Martha to discuss it before making any decisions. She said completely cutting Claire off might create more questions and resentment later when the kids were old enough to wonder why I prevented all contact. But she also stressed that any interaction needed to be carefully controlled and that the kids should understand I was the one making decisions about Claire's involvement in their lives. I talked to Devin and Maya separately about it. Devin shrugged and said he guessed cards would be okay as long as he didn't have to see her. Maya asked if the cards would have mean things in them, and I promised I'd read every card before giving it to them. I sent a letter back through the attorney saying Claire could send cards but no gifts and no requests for contact. Devon's birthday came first. The card arrived a week before his 10th birthday, and I opened it to check the contents before showing it to him. Claire had written a simple message saying she hoped he had a wonderful birthday and that she was sorry for hurting him. There was no manipulation or guilt, just a straightforward apology and birthday wishes. I gave the card to Devon after dinner and watched him read it silently. He looked up at me and asked if people who do bad things can become good again. I sat down next to him and told him honestly that I didn't know the answer to that question. I explained that his aunt was sick and getting help from doctors, and that maybe someday when he was older, he could decide for himself if he wanted a relationship with her. But right now, my job was to keep him and Maya safe, and that meant controlling how much contact they had with someone who'd hurt them. Devon nodded and put the card on his dresser, and we didn't talk about it again that night. Maya's 7th birthday party happened 2 weeks later. We kept it small with just a few friends from daycare and our supportive neighbors who testified on my behalf. I decorated the living room with streamers and balloons, while Maya helped me frost her birthday cake. Her friends arrived and they played games in the backyard, their laughter filling the house in a way it hadn't since before CPS showed up at our door. When it was time to sing happy birthday, Maya stood in front of her cake with 7 candles flickering and a huge smile on her face. She closed her eyes to make a wish and then blew out all the candles in one breath. Everyone clapped and cheered. I cut slices of cake and watched Maya and her friends eat and giggle together. Looking at my daughter surrounded by friends and genuinely happy, I thought about how far we'd come from that terrible morning when everything fell apart. Kids are tougher than adults give them credit for. Maya and Devon had survived something that would have broken a lot of people, and they were finding their way back to joy and trust. We still had hard days ahead and therapy sessions to work through, but sitting in my living room watching Maya's birthday party, I felt hopeful about our future for the first time in months. 6 months passed with weekly therapy sessions, where Martha watched us slowly rebuild what Claire had broken. Martha scheduled a progress evaluation at her office, and I sat across from her while she reviewed her notes from the past months. She told me we had made remarkable progress in rebuilding trust and processing the trauma, even though we were not completely healed yet. The evaluation showed Devon's anger outbursts had decreased significantly, and Maya's separation anxiety had improved to manageable levels. Martha recommended reducing our therapy frequency from weekly to bi-weekly sessions, which felt like real validation that we were genuinely moving forward instead of just surviving. I left her office feeling lighter than I had in months, because someone who specialized in this kind of trauma thought we were actually doing well. 2 weeks after that evaluation, Devon came home from soccer practice bouncing with excitement and told me he made the select team. He asked if I would be his assistant coach, and I saw it as a significant sign that he trusted me again and wanted me involved in the things that mattered to him. I agreed immediately without even thinking about the time commitment, because this was Devon choosing to let me back into his world. I spent my evenings after the kids went to bed watching coaching technique videos on YouTube and reading articles about youth soccer development. The head coach sent me practice plans and drill instructions, and I studied them like they were the most important documents I had ever read. Being grateful for this opportunity to rebuild our bond through something Devon loved made all the late-night studying worth it. I was at the grocery store 3 weeks later pushing my cart through the produce section when I saw one of the neighbors who had given a statement supporting Claire's allegations. She was picking through apples, and when she looked up and saw me, her face went red. She walked over and awkwardly tried to apologize while clutching her shopping basket. I was not ready to forgive her yet, but I managed to be civil instead of walking away. I told her I hoped she would be more careful about believing accusations without evidence in the future. I explained that her statement had almost destroyed my family permanently, and that Maya and Devon had suffered because people chose to believe lies instead of asking questions. She stammered more apologies, and I just nodded and pushed my cart past her toward the cereal aisle. My hands were shaking as I grabbed a box of Devon's favorite cereal, but I felt proud that I had not yelled at her even though part of me wanted to. Maya started first grade in late August with much less anxiety than I expected when I walked her to her classroom that first morning. Her teacher introduced herself and told me to call her if any concerns came up during the transition. The first parent conference happened in October, and I sat in the tiny chair next to Maya's desk while her teacher pulled out a folder of her work. The teacher told me Maya was doing well academically and socially, and that she had been watching for signs of ongoing trauma, but saw a happy and well-adjusted child who talked proudly about her dad. She knew about our situation because the school had been informed during the CPS investigation, and she wanted me to know that Maya seemed genuinely content. I looked at Maya's math worksheets and reading journal entries and saw evidence of a kid who was thriving instead of just surviving. Devon and I had a conversation one evening in November while we were cleaning up after dinner, and he was drying dishes next to me at the sink. He told me he was glad we were together again and that he was sorry for being so angry at me before. I put down the plate I was washing and turned to face him completely. I told him he had nothing to apologize for and that his anger was completely justified given what had happened to us. I explained that I was proud of how hard he had worked in therapy to process his feelings and give our relationship another chance. Devon hugged me right there in the kitchen with wet dishwater soaking into both our shirts, and I realized this was the first time he had initiated physical affection since reunification. We stood there for a long moment before he pulled back and picked up another dish to dry, like nothing had happened, but everything had changed. On the 1-year anniversary of the day, CPS took my children. I called a family meeting after dinner, and we sat together in the living room. I told them I wanted to talk about how far we had come since that terrible morning. Maya said she did not have scary dreams about being taken away anymore, and her voice was confident when she said it. Devin said he felt safe now, and that he was not worried about someone taking him from our home again. I told them both that what happened to us was terrible, but it also proved that nothing could break our family apart permanently. We had survived something that could have destroyed us, and instead we had chosen to fight our way back to each other. Maya crawled into my lap, even though she was getting too big for it, and Devin sat close enough that our shoulders touched. I made the decision not to pursue any further contact with Claire, even supervised visits, because the kids were thriving without her in their lives. Introducing her again might destabilize the progress we had worked so hard to achieve. I called Martha to discuss my decision, and she supported it completely. Martha reminded me that I could always revisit the decision later if circumstances changed, but right now, my priority needed to be protecting the healing we had accomplished. She said the kids were doing remarkably well, and that adding Claire back into their lives could trigger regression in their progress. I felt relieved that Martha agreed with my instinct, because part of me worried I was being too harsh by cutting Claire out completely. Devin's soccer championship game happened on a cold Saturday in early December, and I stood on the sideline in my assistant coach jacket watching the game unfold. The score was tied with 2 minutes left when Devin got the ball at midfield. He dribbled past 2 defenders and took a shot from outside the box that curved perfectly into the upper corner of the net. The referee blew the whistle for the goal, and Devin's whole team rushed to celebrate with him. After the final whistle, Devin ran straight to me and hugged me in front of his entire team and all the parents watching. In that moment, I realized we had truly rebuilt what Claire tried to destroy. The bond between us was actually stronger now because we had survived something terrible together and chosen to fight our way back to each other. Maya told me one night at bedtime in mid-December that she loved me all the way to the moon and back infinity times. Those were the exact words my late wife used to say to the kids before she died. Hearing that phrase from my daughter felt like a blessing from my wife, like she was telling me I had kept my promise. Despite everything that had happened, I had taken care of our children and kept our family together. I tucked Maya in and kissed her forehead and told her I loved her to the moon and back infinity times too. I sat on the edge of her bed for a few extra minutes after she fell asleep, just watching her breathe peacefully. Clive called me a few days before Christmas to tell me that Claire had completed her first year of psychiatric treatment. Her therapist reported significant progress in addressing the underlying mental health issues that had driven her actions. Clive reminded me that this did not obligate me to allow contact and that the decision remained entirely mine. I thanked him for the update and told him I was genuinely glad Claire was getting help. I explained that my focus remained on my children's well-being, and they were doing better without her presence in their lives. Clive said he understood completely, and that he would continue to update me on Claire's situation, but would not pressure me about contact decisions. I hung up the phone and looked at the Christmas tree Devin and Maya had helped me decorate the previous weekend, and felt certain I was making the right choice for our family. Our final therapy session with Martha happened on a Tuesday afternoon in late October, after 10 months of weekly meetings. The 3 of us sat in her office like we had so many times before, while she smiled at us and said we had done the hard work of healing together. She told Maya and Devin they could always come back if they needed to, but that she felt confident we had the tools to handle challenges as a family now. Devin asked if that meant we were fixed, and Martha laughed and explained that families are never completely fixed because life keeps throwing new problems at us, but we had learned how to talk through hard things and support each other. Maya hugged Martha goodbye and thanked her for helping us, which made me tear up a little because my 6-year-old daughter understood how much work we had all put into becoming okay again. We walked out of that office for the last time, and I felt grateful for Martha's help, but also proud that we had fought our way back to being a real family. The next Sunday afternoon, we went to the park where we had scattered my late wife's ashes 3 years ago. Devin and Maya ran off to play on the swings while I sat on our usual bench, watching them laugh and chase each other around. The sun was warm and the park was full of other families doing normal weekend things. I watched my kids play together without fear or sadness weighing them down, and I realized we had chosen not to let what Claire did define us forever. We were not the same family we were before all this happened, but we were whole again in a different way. That was enough for me. We were moving forward together, and that was what mattered most.